Hi, I'm Lindsay Zubek, and this is Grown to Lead, a podcast by the Plum Leadership Group. This show is about the art and science of leadership and the experiences that shape leaders along the way. Let's dive into today's episode. Elle, how are you?
Oh, I'm so good. I'm so happy to be here with you today, Lindsay.
I am so excited to talk to you. As you know, confidence is one of the topics that's near and dear to me, and we're here today to talk about executive presence. And it is so connected to confidence. Executive presence is not only how we're presenting ourselves externally, but also internally. But before we get into that, Elle, I wanted to just get an overview of some of your background. You've worn many different hats in your career. You've been an actress, a producer, a coach. Maybe walk me through your journey and where it's led you to today.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. And I just want to say again, thank you, Lindsay. And you and I just met recently, and I watched you present one of your keynotes on confidence to a room of very, very powerful professional women. And it is such an important topic. So thank you. And thank you for inviting me here. And yes, my journey has been varied. I started my career as a professional actress, always believed that was my path. I was very blessed to have the opportunity to work professionally, touring New York stuff. And then I met a man on a cruise ship. I was a singer, dancer on a cruise ship, and he was a mime and a juggler and a fire eater. So of course it would falling in love on a cruise ship. He was from California. He moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, where I'm based. And we tried to figure out, okay, how do we sell a mime in Ohio? And then we thought, does anybody even know what a mime is in Ohio? So that launched our first entrepreneurial journey and still performing, but I really started to understand how much I love producing, how much I love sort of being the visionary behind the business or the brand. Did that for years, and that mime transitioned to professional speaking, which again, I always say I'm probably the only person you've met who has sold a person who got paid not to talk and then sold a person who got paid to talk. But that was an exciting shift from the entertainment world to the professional speaking world. Got very involved in corporate and really started to dive deep into professional development, leadership development, communication development. And that's what launched the career that I'm doing now. I was behind the scenes for a while, sort of stepped onto the stage, so to speak. And now that's the passion that I bring to my programs and to corporate executives, with corporate executives, really is about deepening your self-awareness, knowing who you are, so you can show up as the best version of yourself. And that's where the executive presence comes in.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. And Elle, just to level set, I always like to start so that we're all on the same page because people can have different definitions of executive presence. But how would you define executive presence?
Yeah, that's a question that I get asked a lot. Executive presence isn't just about status or your role or your tailored suit. It really is about how you show up, how you make people feel, the energy that radiates from within you. And, it's a little bit of an elusive kind of it factor thing. The question I get is, how do you develop it? Which I'm sure we'll talk about. But it really is about, well, I guess psychologists call it thin slicing. Thin slicing is in those first 7 seconds. What do people feel, see, believe about you? And how do you make them feel? Are they leaning in? Are they listening? Do they want to follow you? Or do they pass over you? And so harnessing that sort of that grounded presence, that grounded strength that makes people kind of pay attention to you is what executive presence is.
And I love that it's the first 7 seconds. We make so many judgments about people in our initial, as they walk into the room. I spent a lot of my career interviewing, both in HR and in leadership. And I would always, the minute they walked in the room, I knew my perception, what I
Yeah.
thought of them. So it's so important those first couple seconds. And you mentioned, that we sometimes think it's the suit that you're wearing or how you're holding yourself. Is that a misconception about executive presence, or what other misconceptions are there?
So there was a study done by the Center for Talent Innovation, and they followed 90 global companies, the leaders of those companies, and it was determined that executive presence is made up of three things: gravitas, communication, and appearance. And what I found most interesting is that gravitas makes up 67%, communication 28%, and appearance 5%.
Oh, wow.
And then the question is, okay, well, what is gravitas?
Mm-hmm.
And gravitas is that quiet strength and presence. It is that people, exuding credibility, exuding calm wisdom. So people trust you. They listen to you, especially when the stakes are high, especially when there's chaos. But it's this dynamic mix of poise, integrity, emotional intelligence, decisiveness that portrays you as capable, portrays you as trustworthy. So, yeah, so the trick is developing gravitas, which is kind of this elusive soft skill word.
And so, yeah, I would say that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions. I didn't know
Yeah.
that percentage. And I think a lot of us
Yeah.
think that the 5% is a lot more than it is, but it's more about, your energy and how you're carrying yourself and your inner confidence. How does someone develop that, Elle? How does someone develop that internal gravitas?
Yeah, that I have a very deep belief that self-awareness, knowing who you are, understanding why you do, why you think what you think, why you feel what you feel, unlocks the ability to be more grounded, more present, more confident. Because as we grow in self awareness, we understand what we're good at and what we're not good at. And if we can have compassion about those strengths and weaknesses, knowing that we're made up of all of them, then we can take the next steps of emotional intelligence, which include empathy, the ability to really understand, look through the eyes of other people. The next sort of step of emotional intelligence is self-regulation, understanding what triggers us so that we're not blindsided and reactive, because that shows us out of control. And then the fourth is social dynamic, understanding the emotions of yourself and others, how to manage your own emotions, how to understand others, especially in context of the group dynamic. And once you develop a deeper level of emotional intelligence, then you're able to show up authentically, vulnerably, transparently as yourself. And in that groundedness, we can then respond, react. We have a little bit more command of our emotions, and then it leads to being present and utilizing those emotional intelligence skills to then have influence and impact.
So, I'm very big supporter of emotional intelligence and of starting from within.
Mhm.
There is a phrase that I like to say, it's not fake it till you make it, it's fake it till you believe it,
Mhm.
because it's
Yeah.
really about that inner quality. Actually, today I was looking on social, and I'm not sure if you've heard of Adam Grant, but Adam Grant was interviewing Brene Brown, and the topic was on executive presence. And I think they were talking about the misconception of how it's the 5% of how we show up,
Yeah.
and connecting that to authenticity. Because often there's that push pull of people assume, ooh, if I'm going to have executive presence that's coming from a like fake spot, it's going to
Mhm.
rub against authenticity. So
Mhm.
how do you view those two, you know, the concepts of executive presence and authenticity? How do you view that together?
Yeah, I mean, when we project, when we perform, when we, very overtly command, and sometimes people have a misconception that that's executive presence. To me, that is very inauthentic. It's forced, it's
Mm.
almost on top of who we are. If you are truly connected to who you are, which we talked about, like I always say, what are the words you want people to say about you when you leave the room?
Oh, that's great.
And then that's important. That's your leadership
Mm.
identity, that's your brand identity. But what are the words that you say to yourself? How are you speaking to yourself? Are you, if you allow others to make up your brand identity, they'll say words like nice or fine. So being very intentional about what are the values, what are my priorities, what do I stand for, which again kind of goes back to that self-awareness. We have to know who we are to be able to show up authentically. But when we're clear about what we value, what we prioritize, that becomes clearer to others as well. So I believe that when we understand our values shape our beliefs shape our mindset, which again is that how are we talking to ourselves? How are we
Yeah.
showing up? What do we stand for? And then all those inner things shape our words, our gestures, our body language. So to me, yeah, you do have to practice some of the external presentation, techniques for, and I agree with you. It isn't fake it till you make it, but there is a little bit of, I have to like stand with my feet grounded. I have
Yes.
to be sure that I'm feet planted. I'm not using a bunch of filler words. I'm not over gesturing. I'm not over explaining. So there are some technical things we do have to practice, but I do believe that the work begins with knowing who you are and then allows you to be that.
Absolutely. And so, how do you work with clients? Elle, if you have a client that's coming to you and they're looking to develop their executive presence, I assume it might be because they're looking for a promotion, they're looking for a new job, they're looking to public speak, right? But you tell me, what do clients come to you for, and how would you help them develop that executive presence starting from within?
Yeah, I mean, it's um a wide range of ways. For some people, it purely is I need to appear more influential, I need to have more impact. So we are kind of working from the outside in. We are working on the presentation skills. I do a lot of like record yourself, you know, slow down, pause 5 seconds before you speak, some just practical techniques. And then I also, kind of similar to the work you do, where mindset, confidence, what are we saying to ourselves? How do we handle imposter syndrome? And unfortunately, that tends to be a lot more women than men.
Yeah.
So it's about meeting people where they are. What do they need? What do they, where are they noticing the misses in their work? Developing executive presence might just be about steering a conversation or handling a conflict or handling different opinions for a project. So it could be as simple as how do I speak up confidently and boldly? It could be how do I stand in front of a crowd of 500 people? Yeah.
And you mentioned something I'd like to dig a little bit deeper on, and that's some of, the gender differences. I tend to have women come to me using the word, I want to develop my confidence. And I'll
Hmm.
have men come to me, it is under a different umbrella, but underneath it, it really is about developing confidence. And
Yeah.
it's often, again, for that purpose of promotion or something's not going in the right direction in their career, they're trying to develop something. But what have you noticed in terms of the differences between men and women with executive presence? Are there different techniques you use from them? Are we penalized or rewarded in different ways societally, in how we show up
Yeah.
with our presence?
The experiences that I have are women often overdo it.
Mm.
They're trying so hard to appear confident, to appear authoritative, to appear as the leader. So they become a little bit too aggressive or bossy or the other B word that we hear.
Yeah.
And so there's this like almost like, okay, I found my voice, but now it's a little too loud. So helping them remember that, again, going back to the sort of the misconception of executive presence, it doesn't have to be being big and bold and loud. So helping women kind of finesse communication, listening more, asking questions, pausing before they speak, not feeling, they have to explain and speak quickly. I think that's been something I've worked on with women. Yes, of course, mindset is a big part of it, because then there's a group of women who just struggle with taking up space, with speaking out. So we work on, how are you filling the room? How are you speaking up? What eye contact are you making? So there's some technical skills along with those mindset skills. Um, yeah, and I think women tend to, from my experience, tend to be a little bit more vulnerable and willing to say, this is where I'm struggling. This is sort of, I'm burdened with self-doubt, imposter syndrome, stage fright even. Men tend to be a little bit more, and again, my clientele tend to be a little bit more guarded, and they want to understand how to have more influence, how to have more impact. They're very result oriented, and they're not necessarily always thinking of it as them. It's more like
Yes.
a layer on, how can I improve, not what might I need to fix. But once
I
we get
totally
into it,
agree.
yeah, once we get
And
into it, and if they're willing to open up to me, which most, if I'm working one on one, then we can get a little bit to the root of it.
it's interesting you said about women, sometimes feel the need to be a little bit bigger.
Mhm.
And that's where I've found, when I've veered off, it's because it doesn't connect to me totally authentically, right? It's like that disconnect of um, a confidence in who I am, a confidence in everything that I bring and all the gifts that I bring, and it doesn't have to be over the top. And when I've like faked it and it comes over the top, it comes across as just not me and inauthentic, and it doesn't land in the right way. And so that's where that combination between being authentic to yourself and really owning, like, I deserve to be here. I've worked hard to be here. I believe in my abilities. I'm of value. I'm of worth. I'm lovable. All of those things comes out naturally. It doesn't need to be overdone. So I really connect with that.
That work that you're talking about, that like, I am worth being here, I do have something to add, that takes practice too.
Yes.
It's it's like neuroscience tells us that the brain believes what it hears repeatedly.
Yes.
And so we have, most times we are beating ourselves up. So noticing we're doing that, so we can flip it to start encouraging ourselves. I always challenge women to reflect back on their past, because we have these scripts that tell us, who do I think I am? Why am I here? I don't have anything to add, or I didn't do this by myself. I had a lot of help, and I encourage women to go back and think of, who are the champions in their life? Who are the people, whether it's all the way back in grade school, who are the champions who really saw your gifts, saw your talents, recognized them, acknowledged them? And I encourage them to write that down and really, really flush out that story, because in those moments when you're most afraid and you're feeling those swirling negative thoughts, I encourage women to pull that. Who's that champion? And I'll give you an example really quickly. So I was in my acting career, I'm a singer, and there's types of voices and there's types of characters. And I worked with a team, two men that were like artistic directors of this theater company. One loved my talent, always cast me. The other did not. He never cast me. And so I knew one was my champion and one didn't prefer me. But I did a show with the one that didn't prefer me once, and I was singing in a rehearsal, and he looked at me and he said, "That sounds amazing." Because I didn't have the voice type he preferred. Can I tell you how many times I recall that moment? I'm ready to walk on a big stage. I'm ready to sing somewhere publicly, and I'm, swirling in the self-doubt. But I call on that memory in that moment, and it kind of wipes the negative away and resets me with the positive. So whether it's a key phrase to flip when you're
Yep.
telling yourself something negative, flip it to something positive. We have to train our brain to think differently.
One of the misconceptions, Elle, about confidence, statistically, it's 80% of our thoughts are negative. That's just part of evolution of how we are constantly trying to sort out threats. It is about training, recognizing, right? Having that pause to say, is that thought real? Where is it coming from? Let me reframe it. Let me capture this beautiful memory of someone who didn't necessarily prefer my voice or my acting, and how they then believed in me, right? Like finding whatever that is for you.
Yeah.
For me, sometimes it's a mantra
Yeah.
or a symbol, but something to bring us back is so important, because it's just human nature that we will have those swirling, doubtful thoughts. They're never going to go away, but we can be aware of them and try to flip the script, like you said.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Another thing that you've said is that communication and presence isn't just about words, it's about
Mhm.
the whole person.
Mhm.
So talk to me about that.
I mean, I say that executive presence has like three gears: mindset, your voice, and then your body language. We've talked a little bit about mindset. Your voice it's so important because executive presence kind of shows up in how we speak. So I always encourage people, record yourself, practice saying less. Seth Godin, who is a marketer, he says if you
Love
can't
Seth Godin.
say, I know, he says if you can't say it in 8 words, if you can't share a thought or a belief in 8 words, then you probably don't have a good thought. He says, he's all about being concise. So,
Yes,
how
and
can we say
efficient.
less words? He says, if you can't state your position in 8 words, you don't have a position. So, I think it's about practicing less words, avoiding fillers, the over explaining. That's sort of like the voice part of it. Then there's a scientific study that was done that says that when we use calm language, a confident tone, the leadership perception increases by 38%. But again, going back to practicing, you have to practice. You have to practice the body language, the posture, the voice, the communication. How are you answering questions? One of the tips I give people is I say, if somebody asks you a question or something, or you're being challenged, pause, wait 5 seconds, collect your thoughts, and respond. And that pausing, that slowing down, that quiet strength, that's gravitas. People are going to lean in and listen because you're not just jumping into a conclusion.
Right.
But then to take it a step further, we can have the, work on our voice, work on our body language, have the right mindset, but then it's the expressiveness. How are we expressing? How are we gesturing? Are we making eye contact? Are we using face expressions? There was a study done of TED Talks. They followed thousands of TED Talks that were studied. The ones with the highest likes, views, and shares were the ones where the speakers had the most gestures. Now we got to be careful that we're not over gesturing,
Yep.
but thinking about how are you expressing through your communication.
Love that. And I feel good about that because I feel like I use my hands and my very expressive face all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And another I always think about with teams too. I play ice hockey and work within teams, and even just our nonverbal cues with our teams. How many high fives, right? There's that Mel Robbins, the high five habit, and there's research into the team. So it's not necessarily even the words you're saying, but just that physical gesture of high five just sends to your teammate, you got this, I'm on your side. Like it just, that whole vibe gets
And
improved.
smiling and
And
open
smiling. Yeah.
gestures. I say people's favorite subject is themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we also attract and command by being interested, by being engaged, by getting off of our phones. Because if we're not engaged as leaders, why should anyone else be?
Yes.
So,
The
yeah,
energy you give out is the energy you get back, right? When
for
you walk
sure.
by someone and you smile, odds are they're going to smile back. If you walk by someone and you've got an angry scowl on your face, odds are that's what you're going to get in return. So it's also,
Absolutely. Yeah,
mirrors that.
for
Um,
sure.
a lot of people are intimidated with public speaking, right? I think it's one of the biggest fear people have, even over death or spiders. Or some people have a hard time in smaller groups or larger groups or one-on-one. How do you help leaders develop their presence to lots of different audiences and types of groups?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think it's always important to start with knowing your audience, you know,
Mm-hmm.
understanding the role you play within the room, the power structure, and understanding those cues. One of the biggest questions that I get is how do I handle stage fright? And
Right.
sometimes that can be with one person, that can be with a
Mm-hmm.
small group, that can be with a
Yep.
large group. And it's just that it's the nervousness to speak up, to express themselves. And usually that comes, which is no surprise, out of a fear of being judged, being criticized. And it's because when we speak up, we are vulnerable. We are putting ourselves out there in a way. It's like any risk. It's a little uncomfortable, but we have to practice that too. But so in my acting career, I learned how to command attention, how to cultivate stage presence. So what I tell people is when you're feeling nervous, it's usually because you're focusing on yourself. You're focusing on how am I going to do? Do I remember what I'm supposed to do? It's when you let go and you focus on why. What am I hoping to accomplish? What am I trying to get across? Why am I sharing this information? And how is it going to help them? What is in it for them? Then the focus gets off of you and it gets onto them. And so that usually will quiet that inner critic because the inner critic is the one floating around watching you.
Right.
And it does take practice. The other thing I tell people is usually when we communicate in front of let's say a large group, we might have nerves. And there's good nerves because we need to have that elevated energy to stand up and speak. But then there's also nerves that even if they come from a good place can overtake us, make our
Yes.
voice shake, make our leg, wiggle, make our hands shake. That's just an energy that needs
Mm.
to be dissipated. So I say, jump up and down backstage, go do some push-ups against a wall,
Yeah.
anything to kind of help that energy dissipate. And like I said, it could be positive or negative energy. Nerves are the negative, excitement and preparedness are the positive energy. But to help with that breathing, calmness for the presentation, you got to get that out. So there's like a
Absolutely.
little bit of a mindset and a little bit of a physical practice.
Yes. Something I love to do, as I think I shared, is power posing.
Yeah.
Before I'll go into a bathroom and do it, the deep out breath, the
Yeah.
long out breath. It's really about having, you're absolutely right, that optimal level of adrenaline, of excitement, but also not having it tip over to nerves. Like you do want to be a little bit nervous. That's what gives you some energy. And I love the idea of switching it into what's for them, taking it out of you. Because really when someone's, especially if you're in front of a large group, they're there for their own reason and it's not about you, right?
Yeah.
It's about them. So I love that
Yeah.
shift. Elle, that's super helpful.
Yeah. Another phrase that I love to share is people follow people who make them feel seen and heard. So in a smaller group, I think that, that creates executive presence, creates connection, helps, steer a conversation is when people feel like you're really with them. You're really listening. And again, it goes back to the same thing. You're focusing on them, not yourself.
Right. So you've had a career that's just been steeped in communication, right? In lots of different forms. That's been the string that's been woven through your career. What would you say has surprised you the most or evolved the most throughout your career as it relates to communication?
Well, I'm going to probably sound old, but just watching how communication, one, the overabundance of content, the speed in which we get it, the shorter amount of information we need. I think I said the thin slicing, psychologists call it thin slicing, and they say 7 seconds. I think it's less than that.
Yeah,
I think it's like 4 seconds. So the speed in which we have the ability to make that first impression, to command that attention, I just think has shrunk. And I think that it is even more important that we know, going back to my core tenet of self-awareness, knowing who you are, practicing the mindset so you walk in and you make that first impression. So yeah, I guess it would be the speed in which communication is happening. And now with AI, it's even changing exponentially more.
it's so true. Our attention
Yeah.
spans have become shorter and shorter and shorter. And I do believe, like, that emotional intelligence piece is going to become even more vitally important because we're losing it, right? So it's something
Yeah.
that we even need to invest in and develop.
Right. I have two very executive level C-suite leaders that I'm working one-on-one with. And it is because they are they are seeing more than ever the importance of working on the relationship building and the communication building and the stopping to chit chat and small talk and invest in the people because so much of it is disappearing.
Right. Absolutely.
In fact, I
So,
have one client, I'll just share real quick.
yeah.
He's so efficient. I work with something called the Enneagram. It's a personality
Yep.
system. So his Enneagram type, if you're familiar, is a type 3, which means he's an achiever, he's results oriented, he's task oriented. We had to build into his day to day that chit chatting is a task. Because he
Yes.
didn't see any, it was like, how do I build this in? Because I see how valuable it is, but it's not in my nature. So we build in these social interactions for him because he's a great guy and he's got a
Yep.
ton of personality, but that importance of slowing down and connecting has become so much more important.
Absolutely. And it's not in your calendar. It's not a task to be done, but it is
Right.
the foundation of
Yeah.
every team, of every organization, of every business. You are only as good as the people, as your team, as the people on you, and they want to feel seen and heard and valued. And you can only do that through, you're right, pausing, listening, asking questions, not just about driving projects. You
Yeah.
need people
Yeah.
to drive those projects.
It's funny 'cause I spoke with another leader this morning on a coaching call,
Mhm.
and she was like, I got to wait till I know everything before I tell my team what to do. And I said, well, they're talented, right? And they have the skills to lead that project. Why don't you create a dialogue? Why don't you start with the conversation of, so it was just a whole different way that she thought about it, was rather than this directive and this handing down, opening it up to more collaboration, more communication. So yeah, I think that's becoming definitely more important.
So, Elle, what's one tip or trick or quick win that you would give to someone listening who's looking to develop their executive presence? What's one thing that they could try to tactically implement today?
Wow. Well, that's a tricky question because it depends on where people are.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the first thing, like level one, would be start to notice how you're talking to yourself. Start to notice when you shrink down and don't speak up. Start to maybe record yourself. Are you saying ums and uhs and I don't know or I know? Are you weakening your language? So start to basically step back and assess, be aware so that you know where to work. A very tangible skill is something I already said before, where you get asked a question, maybe somebody pushes back, maybe there's some conflict, and you pause, take a breath, wait 5 seconds, and respond. because people just do not do that. They're so afraid of silence and practicing silence, practicing pausing even in a conversation. And then the third thing I would say, I'm just full of them now. The third thing I would say is people don't understand that the most powerful position you can take in for body language is feet shoulder width apart and arms to your side. And just in a very neutral position. And I will say women in particular tend to hold themselves and comfort
Yes.
themselves and
Yes.
touch their hair and touch their face, and sometimes they hold their arms between their, like down at their between their legs, or
Hmm.
they might even be standing with one foot heading out the room, heading out the door. So, as I would say, mostly for a woman, I would encourage just practicing that very neutral, grounded body language, body posture, because that actually will exude a tremendous amount more confidence and strength from the external presentation.
Absolutely. And then you start to feel it, right? That your body starts to
Exactly.
work with your mind. I love that advice, Elle. And to your second point of pausing, a lot of us in conversation are so focused on what we're going to say. If we allow ourselves that pause, it not only is, I think, commanding some presence, giving a moment to get your emotions in check, it allows you to fully listen to the other person and then take a beat and formulate. And that's how you have a respectful dialogue. So I think that's very powerful advice that I think we all, whether we're looking to develop our executive presence, I think we're all looking to develop stronger communication skills.
Yeah.
So those are
So
really
in
powerful.
acting, as an actor, we had to practice being present because you are saying the same lines over and over. You're doing the same situation over and over, and it's so easy to be thinking about, okay, what's my next line?
Yeah.
Rather than really fully listening. So, again, as we've said now many times, it is a practice to just be present. And then you can do it simply by going on a walk and let's notice at anything that's yellow. How can I focus on things that are yellow? Simple things to stay right in the very present moment. And then you can kind of take it into work, because in our relationships, we get flared. We either get
Right.
triggered or we get upset or we get reactive or we start thinking ahead. So practicing it small so that when you get into the more important or heightened situations, you kind of have exercised that muscle of, I'm going to take a breath, I'm going to wait, and then I'm going to respond. It's
Yeah.
hard.
I think the lesson in all of this is that these are muscles we need to build. They're muscles that we need to continually work on, develop internally, externally, listening. All of them are muscles that we can always be working on and developing, not only in work. I find this is really powerful in coaching. It usually someone will come to us, Elle, right, on a professional basis. Ooh, it impacts your personal life so beautifully.
Oh,
One
for
of
sure.
the compliments that I had through our Manager Essentials program is one of the best compliments I've ever received. He said, I've become a better listener in every aspect of my life, because I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's huge, right? Not just professionally, but personally. So the impact that all of this can have on someone's whole person, on their whole life, can be really life changing and
Yeah.
impactful.
I always say it's a
Yeah.
2 for 1.
Yeah.
And a better work and better home.
And better
Yeah. And
home.
then, yeah. And I always am just so honored and find those leaders who decide to invest in their team in these areas, because it is a whole person improvement. I just think that's, those are the leaders that are leading teams to, I think, greater levels.
Absolutely. Those are the teams that are going to grow and develop and thrive and ultimately be successful. And it trickles down to your end consumer or customer. Absolutely. So now it's time for the Leadership by Lindsay lightning round. Lightning.
Okay. Ooh.
I'm going to ask you a couple quick leadership questions that I ask a lot of my guests. And the first thing that comes to your mind, Elle. So, a leader or communicator who you admire, who would that be and why?
Yeah, I had Seth Godin because I
Hmm.
love his directive to be concise. He also talks about asking permission. So I do like him. Of course, who cannot not love Brene Brown? I just think she has an incredible way of framing and explaining things that resonates. I think it's not, we all talk about a lot of this of similar things, but she has this way of presenting it that just hits, that I think is a definite gift and beautiful talent.
Hits to the core. I always find
Yeah,
there's an emotional connection whenever
yeah,
I listen or read Brene Brown.
yeah.
Okay. A book, podcast, or resource that you would recommend?
So I'm super into this. Sorry, it's not exactly executive presence, but I'm super into a lot of the longevity stuff that's out right now. Um, Peter Attia wrote a book called Outlive, which is very dense. I listened to it on audio.
About this
He
thick.
has
Yep.
the
It's great.
he has yeah, he has the Drive as his podcast. I love Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Lab. And the reason I think those two are important is I go back to again where I started. Being the best version of ourselves allows us to show up as more effective leaders, more effective communicators, more effective friends, spouses, parents, all of that. I went to a women's summit in New York City, and someone said that our health is our $1 billion investment. We cannot replace our body if it's falling apart. We can't go buy another one or maybe a new knee or a hip, but ultimately, if we have energy, if we're vibrant, if we're able to be focused, that's going to like ripple out into all the other areas of our life, especially confidence and executive presence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how it connects to leaders and leadership because, Peter Attia, his view of it's not just living longer, it's living longer well. So
Hmm.
it's when we work with leaders, it's not just to help them get to the point where they want to be in their career, it's to do it well. It's to be their best. It's to, to not just get there, but get there and be contributing in every pillar and in every aspect. So I love how that
100%. Yep.
connects.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm really into habits and routines. Is there
Uh-huh.
a habit or routine, Elle, that you have, especially maybe as it relates to showing up when you've got to speak, when you've got to, channel that executive presence? Any habits, tips, or tricks?
So, first of all, I love this question. I have been, I think I'm going on like 7, 8 years now of every single morning I do gratitude. And I know, it's kind of a cliche. Go do your gratitude journal. I'm telling you, it changed my life. I started doing 3 things from the day before. I get up in the morning, I do 3 things from the day before, and they have to be different. I can't just say, oh, my health, oh, my family, oh, my, I have to, I recall very specific moments. And that, I'm telling you, that has changed my level of joy and contentment exponentially. The other one I'll say as a before a performance or presentation, I also do the power pose.
Yeah.
I learned in acting, actually in acting school. I had a professor who taught us what he called zaw, and zaw was that inner ball of energy that, yes, I do believe some people are born with charisma, and that is, not given to everyone, but we all have the ability to develop stage presence or executive presence. And he sort of taught us about this little golden ball of energy that lives within us and how we can work to make it bigger so that we can push it out to the audience as not a pushing out, but as a means to pull the audience toward us. Way back in college, I was doing the power pose because that's
Yeah.
how we would practice
That's
it.
your za.
My zaw. So I do it.
Yeah.
I do that before every presentation. I stand and I think about filling the room
Yeah.
with that presence. And yes, it does have that physiological effect that Amy Cuddy talks about for sure.
I might have to steal that za.
It's
It might
awesome.
have been recoined now to Riz, but I think I'm going to go with
Right.
za. I love
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Is there a communication pet peeve that you have?
So My biggeth pet peeve is, first of all, it just annoys me when people repeat themselves over and over and over. It goes back to my belief of what Seth Godin says. But also, I notice sometimes people will hang on to fillers like or I know or like to keep command of a conversation so that there's no like drop where someone might interject. So it drives me crazy because it's very self-centered. So it's that I don't want to lose the attention, but I'm not really saying anything. It's a very tricky thing. You can't really point that out to people unless they ask
Yep.
because sometimes they don't know they're doing it. And that might be, uncomfortable to hear. But I have shared that with some leaders where oftentimes I will sit in on a meeting or a conversation to give that kind of like very specific communication feedback. And that is a note I have given before. But when I noticed it, now I notice it a lot. So that does drive me crazy.
And I've never thought of it from that perspective, Elle, that, trying to hold the conversation instead of just allowing the dialogue to go back and to formulate your thought. So, as a final question, I'd like you to complete this sentence. Executive presence is
Quiet, strength, and command. What's funny, Lindsay, I actually thought about that question, but I didn't think of what it is. I thought of what it is not. It is not performance, projection. It is not a big title. It isn't a fancy suit. It is about that grounded, true connection to who you are so you can show up fully exactly as you are. Because when people are presenting and performing, they're often trying to be somebody else, which is what you said earlier. If I'm pushing, it doesn't feel like me. So being okay if you're not the biggest, loudest one in the room, being okay with pausing and answering calmly, because ultimately that actually creates more gravitas.
Yeah. It's a inner piece of who you are and that comfort in our own skin that allows us to come across in a powerful way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Elle, I want to share my gratitude with you. Thank you so much for being here and your presence. I've lost track of time because I'm just so engaged with the conversation, all that you've taught us here today. I'm grateful to you for your time and all of your wisdom. So thank you for being here, Elle.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's been a pleasure. And I can tell you kind of geek out on this kind of stuff
Yes.
too. So it's fun too, because we share a lot of the same sort of perspectives and process of how we teach and help. So I love that too.
I felt that the minute we met. We just were
Yeah.
in conversation. We were like,
Yeah.
"Ooh, we're into the same jam."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you again, Elle.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank our guest, Elle Zimmerman, for being here. Thank you, Elle, for teaching us all of your wisdom on communication and executive presence. I know I learned a lot, especially that only 5% of our executive presence is made up by what we wear and how we show up physically. That was interesting and new to me. If you're interested in connecting with Elle, you can find her via her website at www.ellzimmerman.com. You can connect with her to schedule a discovery call. You can follow her monthly e-newsletter, or you can access the Beyond Confidence series with tips and tools to grow your executive presence. Thank you again, and remember, confidence is your leadership superpower. Until next time, I'm Lindsay. When someone becomes a people manager, most organizations assume they will figure it out as they go, and the data says otherwise. Research consistently shows that managers account for a significant share of employee engagement and performance outcomes. At the same time, studies also show that the majority of new managers receive little to no formal training in their first year. That gap shows up quickly in turnover, missed expectations, and avoidable people issues. That's why we created Manager Essentials. Manager Essentials is designed to be an onboarding experience for new and emerging people managers. It provides structure, instructor-led one-on-one coaching, and practical assessments so managers are not learning through trial and error on their teams. If you are promoting strong performers into people management and want more intentional ways to support them early on, you can learn more at plumleadershipgroup.com. Thanks for tuning in to Grown to Lead, a podcast by the Plum Leadership Group. You can find even more insight and conversation like this one on LinkedIn from the Plum Leadership Group or on Instagram at Plum Leadership. Hear new episodes when they're available by following Grown to Lead wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, you are a masterpiece and a work of art at the same time.